Boudica Prime recently made her debut in Rise of Kingdoms, and so far she looks to be like an extremely powerful archer commander. But there's a lot of questions about what talents to put on Boudica Prime. Well, in this video, I'm going to talk about the investigation that I've done, the rage simulation testing that I've done, to tell you just which builds I would go with if I'm using Boudica Prime in the open field or in a rally. So stick around. What's up, everybody? Psych out here with another Rise of Kingdoms video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about this commander here, Boudica Prime. We've seen some testing on her, and I'll try to put some links down below for some videos. Chisco's done some videos where he's tested Boudica Prime using one of the Kingdom 254 members, Rated Raven, who unlocked Boudica Prime and expertised her very quickly. And we did a bunch of rallies at real cities, and I looked at a bunch of reports. Thanks again to Rated Raven for Raven Rated, something like that. Either way, we call him Raven. So for sharing those reports in coalition chat, things like that, and going over some of these reports with me. So we found out some really cool stuff about Boudica Prime. And of course, he did a lot of testing with Chisco in that video. And again, I'll put a link to that video down in the description below where you can check that out. But in this video, I want to be talking about her talent builds. Before I get there, I do want to talk about a few things that make her really exceptional. The first thing is this direct damage factor, very large, 2300. It's single target, but still really, really good. And it increases the skill damage taken. So if Boudica Prime is primary, she's going to be hitting those targets, and then whoever the secondary commander is going to be piling on a bunch of skill damage onto that target. So they're going to be taking a lot of skill damage. A bunch of stats here. We get attack, we get march speed, archer defense. Just great stuff for the open field. Here we also get a little bit of tankiness, some skill damage reduction taken, and some bonus to do some additional damage. Again, all really good stuff for the open field. Another thing that makes her a great open field commander is she doesn't have any rally skill or any garrison skill. All of her skills really do apply in the open field, especially this one you actually have to be. It says when attacking troops. I don't think this one counts if you're swarming. But she gets a little bit of healing. She does some increased damage to infantry. And so, again, really good in the open field. And her expertise is really quite exceptional. She does extra damage, an extra 10% damage, although there's been some questions about whether or not this skill is working. I'm not actually sure. But she's supposed to be doing an extra 10% of archer damage. And this is the really important one, and one of the reasons why you really must go expertise Boudica Prime if you want to use her, is that she has an 80% chance of dispelling control effects. This makes her pair really well with certain commanders like Artemisia, who has a silence. Basically, we actually worked out how all this happens, and again, thanks to Raven for sharing these reports. It actually works. It dispels the silence. It's hard to see in the reports, but basically in the turn where Artemisia would be silencing, it actually says on the report, this spell was dispelled, or this effect doesn't take effect or is dispelled. It actually doesn't mention Rage of the Iceni as being activated or anything like that. So you can kind of see it in the reports, but it's a little tricky. You have to look pretty deeply to see them. It's at the very bottom of a turn when you actually see that. But this is really powerful, again, with Artemisia, because what it means is that I think there's about a 40% chance, if I'm doing the math again real quickly in my head, that you will get that Artemisia damage boost, which is really huge, because then Boudica is going to fire off her really powerful nuke with that damage boost added, and have no silence effects, no downside at all. So that's really cool. And I will just scroll up to Artemisia really quickly so we can actually look at the effect we're talking about. It should be on her. On this one here, yes, when her commander, when she reaches 80%, there's a 50% chance she silences her troops, 50% chance she silences, but there's an 80% chance Boudica dispels that. So that means about half the time nothing happens, she doesn't silence herself. Another 40% of the time she would silence herself, but Boudica dispels it, and you get that 50% damage increase if this skill is maxed, which is really big on that powerful nuke that Boudica has. And then you also, there's a 10% chance that you do get silenced, and you have the sort of the downside here. But anyway, it makes Artemisia a really good commander pair for Boudica. Artemisia the primary, Boudica as the secondary. But there are lots of reasons to prefer Boudica as the primary. I already mentioned one, which is that she does increase the skill damage that a target takes when she hits that target. So if we're going to use Boudica as the primary commander, what talent build or what setup should we be using for Boudica? Now, You might have seen there at the bottom, I don't have Boudica unlocked. I've actually been spinning. I spun the last wheel for William because I'm trying to expertise William. I'm getting really close. I think I need about 106 sculptures to expertise William. So I'll be expertising him. Maybe I'll just wait around till the next cycle because I'm not in a big hurry to expertise him, but I'll be expertising William sometime soon. And I'm just gonna unlock Boudica Prime on the next wheel when it comes because I don't have a whole lot that I'm gonna be spinning for there. So I'll just focus on Boudica Prime on that wheel. So I haven't unlocked her yet, but I will show you the talent build. Well, the talent, she is basically the same talent build as YSG, except YSG has Garrison. She doesn't have Garrison, she has what is it, versatility or something like that. It doesn't matter, a talent tree that we're not going to be using. So I'll just use YSG because I've actually set up the talent builds here to show you what I would be using on Boudica Prime. And this is based on Rage Simulator testing. I'll put a card at the top for the introduction to the Rage Simulator. Is a video I did with the XY, looking at a whole bunch of different talent builds and how to optimize the rage we're getting with XY. In this particular set of testing I was talking with Raven about how to set up his talent build, and we're comparing different builds. Chizgol was talking about the build that he was using. I thought, okay, well, let me run these through my simulator and see what talent build really works the best for Boudica Prime. So you have to forget about YSG here. We're really talking about Boudica Prime as the primary commander. And I ran a total of 24 different setups, and those setups where we manipulated several things. One of the things we manipulated was how many points we were putting into this talent. In fact, actually, sorry, I scratched that. I actually didn't manipulate this at all. I assumed you always put, you always got 3 points here, that you were getting 9 rage from that. And I also assumed that you always had rejuvenate max. I just said, okay, in all of these builds, we're going to have that. So what I did manipulate was whether or not we go out here, how many points do we put into Razor Sharp? 0, 1 point, 2 points, or 3 points. I also manipulated Feral Nature. How many points would we put into here in certain builds? In certain builds, we might put 0 points. In certain builds, we might put all the way up to 5 points. So I manipulated all of those. I also assumed we have a Horn of Fury without a special talent because that's what Raven had. And that's what I want to test. And I also think, in the late game, you really need to have a Horn of Fury on a march that Boudica Prime is leading anyway. You want that nuke to go off quicker. Horn of Fury is just really, really good for that kind of thing. So that's the 24 that we looked at, 24 different iterations. We looked at every iteration of Feral Nature combined with every iteration of Razor Sharp and just said, how does this play out in terms of rage? And I will try to drop in here to the screen a little bit of a chart that shows the results from these 24 tests, but I'm really going to focus on a few key ones. And those are the two. I'm going to show a couple of different builds here. Some of the builds that didn't work so well, let me see if I can pull, maybe I'll just reset this build here really quickly to show you some of the builds that did not work, you might think work really well, but they actually don't. So here's one that I've seen players use, and this is one that goes out and does, of course, like I said, gets all this rejuvenate, and it also gets points here in clarity, and then it has a couple of points remaining, and it puts 1 point here in defense and 1 point here in attack. This build tends to not work very well, and the reason it doesn't work very well is because the first skill cycle. Now, I'm really focusing on two areas here. There is open field and there is rally. The problem with this build is it only fires off on turn 8. And again, this has a Horn of Fury on it. So when will it fire its first skill? When will it reach enough rage to fire off that first skill? Turn 8 is the earliest this build can do, and it only does that about 3% of the time. It hits on turn 9 about 41% of the time, and it hits on turn 10 more than half the time, almost 56% of the time. Now, why is that so important? Well, in the open field, you're often going in, you're trying to fire off your skill, and you're trying to get out. To me, this is just too slow for open field fighting. If I want to fire off my skill and do big damage to my opponent before they can hit me with their skill, this build is just too slow. It isn't going to cut it. On top of that, so that's sort of like how fast you fire off your first skill, or what I sometimes refer to as acceleration. There's also the cycle speed. How, what's the top speed? How fast does this get going? This one averages a skill cycle. The median skill cycle is 8 seconds for this build, which in a rally to me is just too slow. So I wouldn't use this in open field, and I would not use this in the rally. So let me get rid of that one. A very similar one that you might see would be basically the same thing, going all the way up here and only putting 1 point in razor sharp. And this is again one that I tested. This one does a little bit better than the one I just used. It's much more likely to fire off on turn 9 about 72% of the time, right? If we go out and we get all these points, and then we go all the way out here to max out clarity. Right, this build here, which gets us an extra little bit of rage, this will fire off on turn 9 a little bit more frequently, about 72% of the time, and about 25% of the time it will fire on turn 10. Again, 3% of the time it fires on turn 8. Again, for me, this is still too slow. It's a little bit better. It does have a better typical cycle. The rage cycle on this build is about 7 seconds instead of 8 seconds. So in a rally situation, this one does do a little bit better. But again, for me, this still isn't fast enough. I want a build that will fire off that first skill faster. And so that really leaves me with a couple of different build options here. I'm going to show you those really quickly. So the first one was the one that I had up a second ago. Or when I first jumped on this page. So let's see if I can remember it. That's this one here. And then we go all the way out here to get rejuvenate. And then I think it had 1 point, if I remember correctly, in clarity. And I went ahead and put the rest of the points up here in whistling arrows. Now you could make a trade-off here. You could say, you know what? I don't really like whistling arrows. I want to put more points in clarity. And you can do that, which will increase the skill damage that the secondary commander does. Yet if Boudica is the primary, you're getting that skill damage boost. And so an extra skill damage boost for that secondary could be really valuable. I could see you wanting to do that. But to me, when I look at whistling arrows and I see 10% chance to increase all damage for 2 seconds, I really like that. It's all damage by 25%. That's a lot more damage than the extra skill damage I get. So it's a little less predictable because, I mean, I'm only going to get it 10% of the time, but that's on any given turn. So in a 10 turn cycle, or maybe just one skill cycle, I've got a reasonable chance of firing that off, and maybe that lands when I'm firing one of my skills for those 2 seconds. I kind of like this build, and this is the build I would go with Boudica on the open field. One of the reasons I like this build is because it will fire off on turn 8 about 12.5% of the time, fires off on turn 9 81% of the time, and only 6% of the time will this fire on turn 10. So this is with a Horn of Fury. This is going to be firing off your skill on average much more frequently, in those open field fights where you're trying to fire off your skill, you're trying to get in and get out. This is just, to me, going to be just going to trade a lot more positive because you're going to hit that skill on them and not get hit with their skill a lot more frequently with this build. This also has a skill cycle time. If you were going to rally with this build, I don't know that I would really recommend that, but if you were going to rally with this one, it has a skill cycle of a typical skill cycle of about 7 seconds, which is pretty decent. There are a couple of other builds you could do. If you say, you know what, I really want to fire off even faster, or I really want an even faster skill cycle, that's when you can go look at one of these builds here. And this build, I think, does work a little bit better in a rally. This is one that actually goes down and gets Feral Nature. And you have a couple of options here. One option is to put 3 points in Feral Nature, as I've done here. Another option would be to put 2 points only in Feral Nature and then put another point somewhere else. Now, the problem with that, to me, is there's not really a good place to put another point here in the archer tree. Obviously, we're missing out on Whistling Arrows. Obviously, we're missing out on Phoenix Tail Arrows, which are talents that I really do like on archers, so we're missing out on those. But we are going to be firing off our skill cycle more frequently. We're going to be firing it off a little more often. This actually has a decent chance, well, not a decent chance, but this build here has about a 1.5 to 2% chance of firing off its skill on turn 7, which is way faster than the others. Again, this is with a Horn of Fury. It has about a 39%, almost a 40% chance of firing off on turn 8, and a 56% chance of firing off on turn 9. So that is the vast majority of time. Only about 2.5% of the time will this fire off on turn 10. So this build is going to fire off your skill much more frequently, at least that first skill, which is the one that really counts. It also has a little bit faster rage cycle. Again, the median rage cycle here is still 7 seconds, but the average rage cycle is a little bit, it's closer to 6.8. So sometimes you actually will get a 6-second skill cycle with this build. So again, that's why I think this one might be a little bit better than in rallies, where again, Boudica has a really powerful nuke. So the more you can fire off that nuke, the better. And in a long running rally, getting that skill to fire off a little bit more frequently than your opponent could really make a big difference. So if I was going to go for the rally build, this might be the one I would go with. Personally, I kind of like this build. I like the flexibility it has. I don't think you're losing that much in a rally situation. I think it has a lot of advantages in the open field. The other thing that I looked at in all this analysis, and you can see that on the chart here, is about rage. How much rage are we wasting? How many times are we going over the cap? One of the things about this build that I really like is that it doesn't go over the rage cap very often. It's a very low percentage. Basically, it's a very similar percentage to that very first build that I showed, the one that's highlighted here in red. So I really like this build a lot, and this is the build that I think I would recommend going with Boudica Prime. Once I unlock Boudica Prime and take her to level 60, this is the build I'll almost certainly be using, because I plan to use her mostly in the open field. And I think this build is going to be the best available build for her in the open field when we're talking about trying to fire off that skill as quickly as we can and do as much damage in the open field to our opponents before they can hit us back. So this is what I would go with Boudica Prime. If you have a different idea, if you think, hey, you know, this is the build I like to do, or if you think that there's something that works a little better, leave a comment down below. I'd be happy to talk about different build options. Most of the things I focus on are on rage. Obviously, there's some different stat choices. When we select different builds, we lose out on some stats, and again, some of those talents with some of the builds that we looked at. But if you have a different preference, go ahead and leave a comment down below. Tell me what build you like to do. I'd be happy to test it out and see how it actually performs. If you like this kind of video, give this video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in the next one.